I used to love Christmas at the Elcroft estate. The tree was always too tall, the ornaments too polished, the fireplace too perfect, but somehow it still felt like home. There was a rhythm to it all, crystal clinking against crystal, the sharp scent of pine, carols humming low beneath conversations about stocks, real estate, and whose kid got into what college. I used to think this house held the shape of a family. Tonight, it felt like a stage, and I was the misplaced prop. Dinner started with champagne and shallow praise. Marisande, of course, took the seat nearest the head, like a queen rehearsing for a coronation. She beamed as her fiancé, Xavian, charmed the room with some story about landing a pharmaceutical distribution deal in Raleigh. My parents nodded like they'd raised the man themselves. I kept quiet, nodding where appropriate, smiling on cue. Until he turned toward me, casually, like he was about to offer me bread, and said, "So, Talia, how's it feel being the most useless one here?" It took a beat to register. My fork stopped mid-air. I didn't blink. I didn't move. For a second, the world suspended itself. I glanced around, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something. My sister's lips curved into a smirk before she burst out laughing. Mom let out a strange chuckle, eyes fixed on the centerpiece. "Xavian," she said, with a teasing nudge. "Don't start." Dad cleared his throat and stared at his glass like it had the power to teleport him out of this moment. And me? I stayed still. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I already knew what they'd do with it. My silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. I thought about the time I helped cover Mom's dental surgery last year while Marisande was vacationing in the Keys. The nights I spent helping Dad organize their estate paperwork after his small stroke. The months I worked double shifts to float the family's property taxes when no one else could. But apparently, that kind of service doesn't sparkle in photos or sound impressive over cocktails. I let my fork slowly touch the plate. "You know," I said, steady as stone, "it's funny how some things look useless when you never pay attention to who's holding everything up." That landed. For half a second, the room stalled again. Xavian gave a fake cough, the kind people do when they want to laugh, but realize the tones shifted. Marisande raised her brows, but not in defense, more like I'd broken script. Mom straightened her napkin. Dad still said nothing. I glanced at the wine bottle and poured myself another inch. My hand didn't shake. I could hear Silent Night echoing faintly from the record player, which suddenly felt like a cruel soundtrack to this display of polite cruelty. "Let's not make this a thing," Mom said, voice sweetened with poison. "It's Christmas." Of course it was. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I watched as Marisande leaned over to correct the server's wine pour and loudly claimed credit for organizing the menu. "It was a nightmare," she said dramatically. "But I pulled it off, didn't I?" She hadn't lifted a finger. I'd coordinated the caterer when she double-booked. I'd sent the guest list to the florist. I even reprinted the place cards when hers came misaligned. But no one would know. No one cared. I tried, briefly, to change the subject by mentioning a small grant my startup had just received. "We're piloting a women's financial literacy program," I said, keeping my tone breezy. Mom waved her hand. "That's nice, honey. Anyway, the florist we found for the wedding is just divine." It wasn't even a pivot. It was a dismissal. Later, they passed around the framed photo from last summer's 4th of July reunion. I remember the day clearly. I was there, helping organize the backyard games for the kids. I even grilled half the burgers. But in the photo, everyone's smiling. Except me. Because I'm not in it. "Where was I?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Oh," Marisande said without looking up. "You must have stepped away. I think you were helping with the cooler or something." And just like that, I was erased again. Not enough to notice. Just enough to be forgotten. That's when the burn stopped feeling like pain and started turning into fuel. I excused myself quietly, pushing my chair back without a sound. No one asked where I was going. I slipped through the hallway toward the frosted window in the sitting room. Outside, the snow glowed blue under the porch light. Inside, laughter floated in again, filtered, distant, no longer personal. I stood alone, hands tucked into my sleeves, and stared into the dark. I wouldn't explode tonight. I wouldn't give them that. But I had just started rewriting the ending. The next morning, the house smelled like cinnamon and apologies no one intended to give. I walked into the kitchen where Marisol sat cradling a mimosa and chatting with Mom like last night never happened. Dad was by the sink, thumbing through the newspaper, half pretending to read, half hoping no one spoke to him. It always amazed me how quickly my family could turn a wound into wallpaper, gloss it over with biscuits and syrup, and carry on like the air didn't still hum with what had been said. "Morning," I offered. Mom looked up briefly. "Did you sleep okay, hon?" "Sure," I said, sliding into the chair farthest from Xavian, who smiled at me with the same expression you'd give a puppy who peed on the rug but you weren't mad about it. Yet, no one mentioned the insult. No one brought up how my worth had been reduced to a joke in front of roasted duck and buttered carrots. Instead, they passed the jam, refilled each other's coffee, and continued decorating the elephant in the room with southern charm and fake cheer. It was Liana who broke the script. Between bites of scrambled eggs, she chirped, "Mom says Aunt Talia didn't need college anyway. She's probably just going to marry someone rich." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was slick, like oil on hardwood floors, slippery, hard to catch, easy to fall on. I turned to Marisol, who barely looked up from her phone. "Kids say the funniest things, don't they?" She didn't even flinch, just smiled with that practiced ease. "They do. Wild imaginations." Dad coughed into his coffee. Mom stared at her napkin like it had the answer to world peace stitched into the edge. I pushed back my chair and stood. "She didn't imagine that, Marisol. She repeated it." "Let's not make this a scene," Mom said without looking at me. I wanted to scream, but instead, I turned to Liana and said gently, "You're very smart, you know that?" She beamed, unaware she'd cracked the gloss. Children don't invent cruelty. They inherit it. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the sitting room, the kind of post-brunch haze where people unbutton pants and pretend closeness. Dad brought out a new framed photo from the last family gathering, 4th of July. Big smiles, red, white, and blue, the American dream propped against a rose bush. "There we are," he said proudly, handing it to Mom. She nodded, then passed it to me. Everyone was in it, even the neighbor's dog. Everyone but me. I stared at the picture. Where was I? "You were probably busy," Mom said, not even pausing. "Helping your dad with something, I think?" Something about the way she said it, as if I'd been present, yet not important enough to include, made my stomach turn. I remembered that day. Dad had a last-minute appointment, and I drove him 2 hours both ways because no one else could rearrange their schedule. "I was there," I said, voice low. "Well, maybe you stepped out when the camera was ready," Marisol offered, her tone light. "It's not personal." "No, of course not. I was just invisible." I looked at the image again. I could see the space where I should have been. I wasn't absent. I was removed. "Sometimes," I said, more to myself than them, "you're so reliable, they forget you're not furniture." No one replied. I took the frame, set it on the table, and walked upstairs without another word. In my room, I opened my laptop and started pulling up everything: bank statements, digital receipts, email threads where I'd paid for things, arranged services, sent birthday gifts when everyone else forgot. I organized it all into folders. My hands didn't tremble. My breathing stayed calm. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd made a habit of it. And I had allowed it, always thinking one day they'd notice. That day never came. I remembered a quote I'd heard Oprah say once: "Forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been different." Maybe she was right, but I wasn't ready to give that up. Not yet. I clicked open an old email thread, something from last year involving Marisol's business presentation. Scrolling through, my eyes stopped on a forward that shouldn't have been there. The date, the attachment, the recipient, all wrong. That wasn't a slip-up. That was intent. The file sat there, untouched for nearly 2 years, buried in a folder labeled Future Plans, which had started to feel more like a bad joke than a dream. I clicked it open, not expecting anything, just numbing myself with digital clutter. But then I saw it, an email thread, subject line, scholarship packet, summer program, Seattle. My application, my essay, even the scanned recommendation letters I'd begged two professors for during finals week. But what stopped me cold wasn't the content. It was the trail. The email had been forwarded, not submitted. And the last name in the chain? Marisande. There was no reply, no confirmation, no follow-up. She didn't forget. She intercepted. My breath caught, not from shock, but from the kind of realization that doesn't blow up. It caves in. A quiet collapse. The opportunity hadn't just slipped away. It had been pocketed by someone who knew exactly how much it meant to me. And then they had the nerve to call me unmotivated. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, heart rate steady but fists clenched in my lap. My sister didn't just skip a step. She rewrote the ending before I even knew the story had started. I remembered that summer too clearly now. I'd gotten the acceptance call while sitting in the grocery store parking lot, a warm bottle of almond milk sweating in the passenger seat. I'd cried from joy. It was a fully funded program. 3 months in Seattle, workshops, networking, the kind of thing that turns resumes into careers. But 2 days later, Marisande asked me to watch Liana while she took an urgent opportunity in Boston. Just a few weeks, she'd said. You know, Mom's still recovering and Dad's working overtime. I can't pass this up. When I mentioned the Seattle program, she said, Talia, you need to be here, not off chasing illusions. I was 25. I had a degree. I had momentum. And I traded it for babysitting and heating up leftover spaghetti for a toddler while my sister's Instagram filled up with polished latte art and rooftop brunches. Sacrifice doesn't count if no one acknowledges it. Then it's just silence. It wasn't just the opportunity she took, it was the language she left behind. Talia's not ready. She doesn't finish things. She's too sensitive. I'd heard versions of it from my mother, my aunt, family friends, each time sprinkled with sympathy and a shrug, as if I was some wayward artist who never grew out of a gap year. I scrolled through my old texts, watching the pattern unfold like mold across wallpaper. Marisande always had the same lines, wrapped in velvet. You've always been the strong one. We all rely on you more than you realize. It's just this one thing, then you can focus on yourself. But this one thing turned into 3 years of, can you drive mom? And can you fill in at the front desk? And I know it's last minute, but you're so good at pivoting. Was I reliable, or was I just convenient? I opened a new folder on my laptop and titled it, Truth. Inside, I copied the full email thread and saved it as scholarship proof. Then I opened Word and typed a single line across the top of a blank page. Receipt number 1, the scholarship that wasn't lost, just taken. I printed the email and slid it into a red folder I kept tucked behind my desk. Not because I needed revenge, not yet, but because I'd finally realized something essential. They rewrote my story once. Now I was the one holding the pen. The group email arrived just past 9 a.m. like a gentle slap wrapped in a silk glove. Subject, Elcroft Legacy Fund, finalized. There it was, clean and polite. My parents had formalized the transfer of our family's investment account, an inheritance trust set aside for the next generation of Elcrofts, names listed, Marisande, Liana, and even a clause for future children. My name wasn't there. I stared at it for a full minute, not because I was surprised. At this point, exclusion had become routine, but because of the wording. The words stability, legacy, and growth were woven into every sentence. It read like a mission statement, one I'd apparently never been part of. Funny how you can build a foundation and still not be invited to live in the house. I forwarded the email to myself, printed a hard copy, and walked into the den where my mother was flipping through catalogs, circling florals with a gold-tipped pen. The sight of her, poised and deliberate, always gave the illusion that everything she did was out of care. That was her power. I held out the paper. She glanced up. What's this? I didn't say a word. She skimmed it, then folded it in half like a grocery list. Sweetheart, you're not married. This is for stable branches. You understand, right? Stable branches. as if I were the windstorm. I nodded once and left the room before my voice betrayed me. Upstairs, I sat at the edge of my bed, reading the email again. This time not as a daughter, but as a stranger who'd been quietly written out of her own story. That evening, I got a text from Mom. Call me tomorrow about flowers. But what followed was a voice message meant for Marisanda, mistakenly sent to me. Talia was never meant for more, Viratis said, casual and unfiltered. She's just background stability. You can count on her, but you don't build around her. She's not the type. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Then I replayed it, 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Instead, I transcribed the words and titled the document, Receipt number 2, The Real Opinion. I saved it in the Truth folder. The next morning, I texted them. Coffee, 10 a.m. No context. They showed up. Marisanda in beige, Mom in muted green, Dad in that same navy windbreaker he wore like a shield. We sat in a corner booth at the cafe near the park. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I opened a folder, thick, tabbed, color-coded. This, I said, is what I've contributed in the past 10 years. I slid over the spreadsheets. Tuition loans I'd paid for Liana's private school deposit when Marisanda's card bounced, maintenance fees for the summer home, the backdated medical copay for Dad's last-minute scans, the 5 years I handled the HOA fees they forgot to set to autopay. I don't need credit, I said. But I won't be invisible anymore. Mom let out a breath. Talia, this again. Families don't keep score. I smiled without smiling. Then why is there a scoreboard I was never allowed on? Silence, not defensive, just paused, as if they didn't know where to file this version of me. Dad shifted in his seat, about to speak, but didn't. Marisande avoided eye contact, tapping her thumb against the ceramic rim of her cup. We didn't yell. No one cried. That would have been easier. As they left, Viratis didn't say goodbye. She adjusted her scarf, checked her phone, but Marisanda stopped at the door, looked back, and said, You're starting to sound dangerous. I held her gaze and replied, No, I'm just starting to sound like someone who remembers. I woke up before the sun had cleared the frost from the windows. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place that held so much noise beneath the rugs and behind the curtains. I wrapped my robe around me, padded across the hallway, and sat at my desk like I was clocking into a job no one knew I had. I opened my laptop and clicked into the folder I'd named Truth. There, I organized the evidence. Spreadsheets of every financial transfer, screenshots of group messages asking me to cover this or that just this once, confirmation emails from services I'd arranged for my parents without a word of thanks. I labeled each new subfolder. Proof. Contributions. Exclusions. One folder, still blank, I named Last Straw. I wasn't ready for it yet, but I would be. People fear confrontation. They should fear precision more. By noon, I was in the living room with a cup of tea, pretending to read, when I heard laughter from the kitchen. Mom and Marisande were going over final touches for the bridal shower. I followed the sound, unsure why, until I saw it. A small velvet box in my mother's hand. She opened it with a reverence usually reserved for funerals or first Bibles. This, she said, placing it into Marisanda's palm, was your father's last gift before his stroke. I always knew it would go to you. It was the necklace. I'd recognize it anywhere. Sterling chain, deep sapphire pendant framed in rose gold. The kind of piece you don't wear every day. The kind you pass down. My voice didn't rise. My hands didn't shake. But my memory sharpened like a scalpel. I remembered that Tuesday 2 years ago, rain spitting against the windshield as I helped Dad out of the car and wheeled him through the automatic doors of the clinic. I remembered him pulling up a jeweler's website while we waited. What do you think of this one? He'd asked, showing me the screen. I thought it was for Mom. I even said, it suits her. He smiled, but didn't correct me. Now it was in Marisande's hands, and I was supposed to pretend history had always bent that way. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. That evening, after everyone else had gone upstairs, I knocked on Dad's study door. He looked up, startled, but not surprised. "Hey, kiddo, something wrong?" "I'd like a moment," I said. "Alone." He closed his laptop and gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." I sat, folder in hand, but didn't open it. Instead, I asked, "Did you know Mom gave the necklace to Melisande?" He exhaled slowly. "She thought it was best." "So I'm best as invisible?" His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stood, placed the sealed envelope on his desk. "It's everything I've paid to keep this family from falling apart. You don't have to read it now, but one day you should." He didn't stop me when I left. Back in my room, I turned on my bedside lamp, pulled out my phone, and opened the same jeweler's website Dad had shown me that day. I found the necklace. It was still available. I added it to my cart, paid in full. Had it shipped overnight. Not because I needed it, because I deserved it. If they wouldn't honor my story, I'd start honoring it myself. The little chime above the cafe door tinkled when I walked in, a cold breeze chasing after me like a shadow that knew something I didn't. I ordered a black coffee, no room, and settled into the back booth, laptop open, Wi-Fi spotty. The usual. I'd barely started reviewing a grant budget when my inbox refreshed with a subject line that made my stomach tighten. "Is this who your sister's marrying?" It was from Xavian. We hadn't talked in a while, but we didn't need pleasantries for this kind of message. She and I had met during undergrad. She was quick with numbers, sharper with people, and now worked as a forensic accountant in Houston. Attached was a document labeled Xavian Grimshaw, Civil Dockets, sealed. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I clicked, 6 pages, redacted lines, but the highlights, those were plain as day. Fraud, credit identity theft, a settlement that never made the press, tucked away under a confidentiality clause in Travis County, Texas. She thinks she's marrying a provider. She's marrying a parasite. I sat back and reread the file. No rumors, no hearsay, just data, signatures, legal seals. I closed the laptop, slid it into my bag, and pulled out my phone. "Melisande, lunch today, just us. Noon, your pick." She agreed after only a pause. That should have told me something. We met at an upscale cafe in downtown Asheville, the kind she liked to post on Instagram. Neutral plates, big windows, food too small to matter. She walked in with the grace of someone who thought everything around her was an accessory. "What's this about?" she asked, sitting before I could stand. I slid the file across the table. She flipped through the first page, stopped at the second, and then glanced up, expression unreadable. "Old court cases." "That's desperate, Talia." "No, desperate is saying yes to a man who's going to bankrupt this family while smiling through your bridal photos." She let out a breathy laugh, the kind you use when you want someone to know they're not worth yelling at. "You've always had a flair for drama." "I don't need drama. I have facts." She folded the file, placed it beside her untouched water, and stood. "I'm not canceling my wedding because you can't stand seeing someone else win." I didn't chase her. I just nodded once, calm as a ledger. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, kicked off my shoes, and checked my email again. Xavian had sent another file. This one wasn't about past cases. It was about patterns. Xavian had registered a fake consulting firm in Austin, Paramount Strategic, which had siphoned off nearly $300,000 from a family trust belonging to his former fiancé. The paper trail ended when she quietly dropped charges, moved out of state, and deleted her social media, bank records, wire transfers, even a scanned letter of complaint she'd written, never filed. "I don't think she disappeared," Xavian wrote. "I think she was erased." I printed everything. This wasn't a feeling anymore. This was a case, and it was mine to use. The next day, I went for a walk through the neighborhood trail behind my apartment, the kind with crunchy leaves and winding wooden benches. I needed air, clarity, distance. When I returned home, my phone buzzed. Notification from Instagram. Melisande had posted a photo of her hand, new nails, gleaming ring. Caption: "Can't wait to be Mrs. Grimshaw." She'll wish she'd listened, but by then, I'll already be gone. I didn't plan to check the family Facebook group. I hadn't opened it in weeks, but I was tagged, and curiosity is a cruel invitation when you know you're not going to like what you find. It was a bridal shower album. Pastel balloons, monogrammed napkins, a custom mimosa bar. All the pieces were perfectly curated, like everything Marisande touched. I wasn't in a single photo, even though I had been the one who arranged the catering and set up the chairs. Then I saw it, buried beneath dozens of comments full of compliments. Xavian's name popped up with one line that slammed into my chest harder than I expected. Everyone's got a role. Some are just background extras. 27 likes, 3 from aunts, 1 from my mother. Not a single correction, not one defense. They didn't just laugh at me, they laughed with him. I closed the app and sat in the dark of my living room, phone resting in my lap like it had betrayed me. For a long while, I didn't move. I just thought about how long it had taken me to believe I mattered, and how quickly they confirmed I didn't. The next day, I attended a local community development event for women entrepreneurs. I hadn't planned to stay long, just show face, shake hands, keep up appearances, but as I passed the second row of vendor booths, I froze. A woman I didn't know was speaking to someone at a nearby table, raving about this amazing new initiative from Marisande Elcroft. She's launching a women's empowerment series that blends financial literacy with storytelling. Revolutionary stuff. I felt my stomach turn. That was my project, my concept, my structure, my words, right down to the tagline I scribbled in my old red notebook. Later that evening, I confronted the only person who would have known exactly where I kept that notebook. Seraphil was folding laundry near the upstairs landing. She looked up as I approached, gentle as always. "Did you ever see anyone go through my room?" I asked. She hesitated, just a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "About 2 months ago, I came in to clean, and Marisande was reading something under your bed. A red journal, I think. She told me you'd given her permission." I said nothing. I just thanked her. And when I got to my room, I pulled the notebook from the back of my bookshelf. Several pages were gone. They don't want your light. They want to wear it like costume jewelry. I walked downstairs and waited in the driveway until Marisande got home. Her car pulled up, headlights off, early like always. She stepped out and saw me standing there. "What now?" she said, tossing her keys in her bag. "You know exactly what," I said, holding the red notebook in one hand and a printed flyer of her new initiative in the other. She looked at both but didn't flinch. "Why are you sabotaging my life?" she snapped. "Do you think I stole your chance, or did you never take one?" I stared at her, breath slow, voice lower than I expected. "You didn't steal my chance. You convinced everyone I didn't deserve one." And then I walked away. Not because I didn't have more to say, but because I didn't need to say it anymore. I had the proof. I had the plan. And I had something more dangerous than rage. Documentation. That night, I set up a secure time-stamped upload through a legal platform. I sat in front of the camera, held up the documents, the screenshots, the old pages from my journal. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just read, line by line, what they'd taken and how I could prove it. "When the truth drops," I said at the end, "no one gets to say they didn't see it coming." The invitation arrived by courier, handwritten, sealed in navy wax, like something out of a southern wedding magazine. It was from Veridis. "Dinner at the Elcroft estate, this Saturday, family only. Let's reconnect." Reconnect. A word that was often thrown around in this family like it meant something, like it ever worked. Still, I went. Not because I hoped for anything different, but because they clearly thought I was still the same, that I'd sit quietly, swallow their theater, and let them use family as a leash again. I wore black, not out of grief, out of clarity. The dining room was polished to perfection, candles lit, china gleaming, everyone dressed like we were filming a commercial for fake harmony. Veridis greeted me with her usual rehearsed warmth. "You look tired, sweetheart." "I'm not," I said flatly, stepping past her. Xavian was already seated at the far end of the table, sipping white wine and smirking like he'd already won. They expected silence. I brought a soundtrack. Halfway through dinner, Just as Marisande began some long-winded toast about gratitude and new beginnings, I reached into my bag and tapped my phone's screen. The speaker I'd connected to earlier hummed softly, and then Xavian's voice cut through the clink of silverware. She doesn't even ask questions. The family? Easy to milk. I'll have my name on that estate by June. The words, slurred from wine, recorded in a voice note he'd sent to a friend one night I wasn't supposed to hear. Marisande's glass froze mid-air. Viratis choked on her Pinot. No one spoke. No one moved. Xavian opened his mouth like he might deny it, then realized there was nothing to deny. Some truths, I said quietly, come best from the devil's own mouth. The recording ended. Silence fell hard. I stood slowly, walked to my father's seat, and placed a manila envelope beside his plate. Inside, a notarized copy of the prenuptial agreement, drafted in Marisande's name. Designed to funnel any shared marital assets directly into Xavian's control in the event of divorce. My father opened it with trembling fingers. Viratis leaned forward. "Where did you get this?" "From the lawyer you all hired," I said. "You really should have chosen stronger passwords." Marisande sat frozen, staring down at the pages that spelled out her future. No one touched dessert. "I never said a word," I continued. "When you handed her my necklace, when you erased me from the family fund, when you turned my project into a marketing tool, I let it slide. I wanted to believe you'd stop." I paused, then added, "But I've already had my fill of betrayal." I picked up my coat from the back of the chair, tucked my phone back into my purse, and walked to the front door. No one followed, not a sound. By the time they stood up, the table was already empty. It took less than 48 hours. That's how long it took for the audio to circulate, for the prenup to be screenshotted, for the whispers to start rolling through town like smoke. I didn't post it publicly. Never needed to. All it took was one person in the Right Wine Club group chat. Suddenly, I was the one they stopped whispering about and started whispering toward. My phone buzzed at 7:03 p.m. I was folding laundry, watching an old documentary rerun. It was Marisande. "Why would you ruin me?" she asked, before I could even say hello. I let the silence hold its weight, then answered with measured breath. "You did that when you let him play you. I just moved the curtain." "He's not like that," she snapped. "He called Dad a placeholder and said the house would be his by June." She paused. "People say things when they're drunk." I folded another towel. "They also say the truth." The line went quiet. Then she hung up. By the next day, the venue had canceled the wedding, citing unforeseen reputational risks. 2 board members from Xavian's business affiliations withdrew. The news hadn't hit the papers yet, but the community already knew. The truth has no volume. It doesn't need to scream. Viratis called a family meeting, said it was urgent, said we all needed to realign. The living room was frigid, even with the fireplace lit. The tension was so thick, you could slice it with one of Mom's sterling cake knives. Dad sat in his usual corner, silent, already tired. Marisande looked like a ghost in highlighter. Face pale, lips drawn tight. Viratis, though. She was still rehearsing control like it was a virtue. "Let's not forget," she started. "This family has always stood on loyalty." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling silence now?" She ignored me. "We don't tear each other down. Not publicly, not internally." Dad, to his credit, spoke up. "We should talk about the prenup." He pulled out the printout, reading clauses like they were funeral rites. Clause 7C, all assets acquired through union default to the spouse named primary on property registration. Clause 9F. In the event of separation, control of inherited equity transitions to the active managing party. And then, mid-sentence, Viratis cut in. "You've always been the complication," she hissed, loud enough to shake the air. "Not the child. You were always the burden." Silence, not stunned, confirmed. Even Dad closed the document and looked away. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. "You couldn't let me have something, could you?" Marisande finally burst. "You've always had to be the voice in the room, even when no one asked for it." You mean like when I funded Liana's preschool tuition? I said. Or when I held the house mortgage while you focused on yourself? Her face twisted, but her words didn't come fast enough. You didn't want something, Marisanda. And you wanted everything without ever earning it. The room cracked open. No more performance. No more curated diplomacy. We didn't scream. We didn't cry. We simply sat in the wreckage of a family that had quietly undone itself for years and now had no language left for repair. I stood. No one tried to stop me. As I walked through the hallway, Veratis passed me without lifting her eyes. I paused just long enough for her to feel it, then leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry. I'm not your daughter anymore." And strangely, that felt like the first time I'd been born. Exactly 1 week after I walked away from the Elcroft dining room, my attorney served Xavian Grimshaw with a cease and desist letter. It was crisp, formal, and brutally detailed, alleging misuse of personal identity and asset manipulation. Attached were exhibits, forged digital signatures, hidden contractual clauses, and correspondence proving intent. I didn't feel triumphant when I reviewed the final draft, just focused. I'd also authorized the necessary estate adjustments months before, quietly transferring my stake in the Elcroft property to an independent trust, locked and untouchable. I hadn't planned to use it, but I'd prepared for this moment like someone who finally understood the difference between planning for disaster and inviting it. Revenge was never the goal. Reclaiming my place was. By Thursday morning, the headlines trickled in. First local, then regional. Prominent entrepreneur faces allegations of prenuptial fraud. Business board drops member following integrity review. I didn't watch the interviews, didn't follow the hashtags. Sometimes you don't win with fire. You win by draining their oxygen. Xavian's partners backed out. Sponsorships pulled. His face disappeared from the event banners, then from his company website. I heard he tried to hold a press conference, claimed the documents were doctored, but by then, no one cared about his words, just the paper trail. That same day, I boxed up the necklace I'd ordered months ago, the one I'd bought to match the one they gave away behind my back. It had never felt like mine. Not anymore. I wrapped it carefully and placed it on Marisanda's porch, just under the fake ivy wreath she insisted made her door feel warm. No note at first. Then I changed my mind. I tucked a card inside. You wore my place for years. This doesn't fit me anymore. You can have it now. I didn't knock. I didn't stay. It wasn't pettiness. It was peace. Back home, I reopened my notes on the women's mentorship program, the one she'd stolen and pitched as her own. I wasn't going to fight for credit anymore. I was going to build it, legally, visibly, and without apology. I registered the name Reclaimed. All caps, bold, just like I planned. I chose an old industrial space in the River Arts District. It was dusty, unfinished, and perfect. I met with a contractor, laughed when the plumber asked if I was just the assistant. No, I said, smiling. I'm the whole damn project. Later that evening, while sipping coffee on my balcony, I opened my inbox and saw the invitation. Subject: Keynote Opportunity, Appalachian Women's Leadership Summit. They wanted me to speak, not as someone's sister, not as a cautionary tale. They wanted me for me. The email ended with a line I read twice. We believe you're the voice this audience has waited for. This time, I wasn't on the list by accident. I was the reason it existed. January 1st began with silence. No texts, no calls, not even a generic Happy New Year from the group thread that used to include me. I stepped out onto the balcony of my new apartment with a cup of coffee and watched Asheville shake off its frost. The street below was quiet, save for the slow scrape of a neighbor's shovel against the sidewalk. It was the kind of stillness that used to feel foreign to me. Now, it was mine. No heirlooms sat on my shelves. No dusty boxes filled with family photos in my closet. No messages asking me to return borrowed things. I hadn't left with anything, and yet somehow I'd brought everything that mattered. I carried nothing from that house, yet somehow I carried everything I needed. Inside, my phone buzzed. A text from Marisand. Just 3 words. Hope you're okay. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. just a breadcrumb tossed into the void, too little, too late. A few minutes later, I opened Instagram out of habit. Verides had posted a photo, her, Dad, Marisande, Liana, smiling. Behind them, a wreath with a wooden sign that read, "Family is forever." I wasn't in the frame, but for the first time, it didn't sting. I wasn't erased, I was just not there. Absence by choice is a different kind of freedom. Mid-morning, I received a letter, thick cream cardstock, no return address. I recognized the seal from the Regional Grant Committee. I'd submitted my application months ago on a hunch and a hope. Inside was a single sentence: "We are proud to fund the full launch of Reclaimed." My knees went weak, not from shock, but from the sudden weightlessness. I sat on the floor and read it again, this time aloud. The walls didn't respond, but my silence did. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like space. That afternoon, I walked to the small storefront space I'd leased 2 weeks earlier, the one no one in my family knew about. Paint buckets still sat along the wall, but the vision was clear. Resource room in the back, mentorship meetups in the front, a bulletin board filled with community job leads and handwritten encouragements. As I unlocked the door, my phone rang. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Hi, I'm Serena," the young voice said, nervous but eager. "I just wanted to thank you. I applied to your program because I saw your name on the flyer at the shelter. She broke off, composing herself. "I didn't think people like you really existed." I swallowed hard. "I'm just someone who knows what it's like to start over," I said. "We rise by lifting others, not by dragging family weights behind us." That night, I received an email from a local podcast. "We'd love to feature you on our upcoming episode. Topic: Women Who Rebuild." They asked how to pronounce my name. For the first time, I didn't whisper it. The auditorium lights dimmed as the host finished my introduction. I stood behind the curtain, palms steady, heart even. This wasn't nerves. This was arrival. The Women's Leadership Summit in Charlotte wasn't just another event. It was the place where people who once overlooked me now made space for me. Without apology, without caveat. I stepped on stage to the sound of quiet anticipation. Faces looked up at me. Some curious, some already nodding, as if they knew the storm I had weathered. I adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began. "They called me useless," I said, letting the words settle. And I almost believed them, until I remembered who I was. A pause. Stillness. Then, applause. Some women wiped away tears. Others smiled through them. I saw heads nodding in rhythm with my story. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was performing or proving anything. I was simply being. By the end of the talk, a line had formed backstage. Young professionals, survivors, single moms, corporate women with tired eyes but hopeful expressions. Later that evening, a short clip of the speech, just those opening lines, was shared online. "They watched me disappear," I said in voiceover. "Now they'll have to watch me rise." It reached 100,000 views in 3 hours. That same week, I finalized the purchase of the commercial building downtown, the same one Verides once called a liability waiting to happen. The lease was mine now, clean, uncosigned, fully paid. I hung the new sign myself, white lettering against charcoal steel, reclaimed, no ribbon cutting, no press, just me, a cup of coffee, and a door key that turned with a satisfying click. Some wins don't require applause, just freedom. Days later, an envelope slid through my mailbox. Ivory paper, embossed edges, my mother's style. A formal invitation to a reconciliation dinner. No handwriting. Just printed text, as if we'd become strangers whose drama could be RSVP'd into civility. I didn't hesitate. I wrote back in my own hand. "I'm not angry. I'm just no longer available to be your scapegoat." I sealed it, mailed it, and never checked if they replied. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to return to the fire. Later that month, I received an email from one of the interns I had quietly mentored. Her subject line read, "You saved me." She'd just gotten accepted into a graduate program she never believed she was worthy of. I had helped cover her housing and a private health procedure she couldn't tell anyone else about. No one ever knew, not even my staff. I left her a note in the funding envelope. You are not alone. You are not lost. There was nothing left to prove. No court to win. No seat at the table to fight for. They never said sorry. And maybe they never will. But that silence, it doesn't scare me anymore. It sings of everything I've outgrown. And for once, the silence belonged to me.